Hi, welcome. Today I would like to talk about basics of Angular 2 routing. So let's get started. I have an app that I have been using, and essentially it is showing some title information, and then it has a button where you can hit it. And let me show you the code for that. In terms of the HTML, it's pretty straightforward, just H1. And we have a button where if it's clicked, it got clicks the click function. And if you look at my module, it's pretty straightforward. Basically, when the click event happens, it is getting from my service some string called next. And this next essentially is a string which can be three different things: error, work, or success. And I'm just printing it out. And in terms of what I want to do with the routing is that essentially every time this is clicked, this some string would be returned. And for our purposes, you can think of it as a random string. And we want to be able to navigate using routes in Angular 2. So essentially, we would be calling a function like router.navigate slash, and we give it a condition. So before I go into the little bit details of the routing, let's see how you can start by using what is called a router module. And in the ngCLI, you can just type in this command and give it and get your router for your app. And I'm going to generate that. As you can see, it generates a router and puts it under hello router.module. And let me just take a quick look at this. So it is generating a new module called hello router module, and it added all these things by default. So I have to add a few more things to be able to do routing and to explain routing. So I've already made some modification that I are needed in this code, and I'm going to copy those right there and kind of walk you through that. So if I go into my router module, this is what I had. I'm going to just replace it with what I wanted. So let me just walk through as to what this is. Basically, you need to import from the Angular router something called the router module and the routes, and that's what it is doing. And the way in the ng module imports, what you want to do is say router module, which is the one we imported for routes, and you give it basically an array of routes. And that's what I'm doing in this. It's called array of routes. And if you look at my array of routes, basically I have a path which says if it's a path is error, then I want to be able to control it with the hello arrow component. If it's work, it needs to be controlled by hello work component, and success, it needs to be controlled by hello success component. So those are kind of the basic things you need to set up your routes. If I look at my HTML, I want to be able to display my HTML whenever I get the route in this area. So I'm going to use this something called the router outlet, and it's router outlet. One thing you would notice that if you have to do this in your app module, you have to include the router module. And to include the router module, what I can do is I have a statement, so I'm going to uncomment it. And this should include the router module now in my app module. Uh, Other thing I need to do is in my app component, I have to be able to navigate to some particular route when the right condition happens. So I'm going to add this router.navigate, and it's complaining that it doesn't know how to get the router. And so we basically have to inject the router here. So I'm going to say private router colon router, and the router is needed, and obviously we need an import. So I already have an import. I can show you where it's importing the router from Angular router. So it should essentially be able to import all of those things. And once I have done that, you can see that by default it goes to the success route, just because that's what it randomly returned. And I'm going to be printing out the values it is returning. So if I hit next, for example, it says it went to an error route, see error route, and it printed something from the error component. If I hit this, hit again, it went to the work route and print had some working. If you want to use the router tree, you can go into the Augury extension, and you can find a link in my website. But basically, you can see that app component has a route to these components. The hello error component is path is slash error. This path is work. This path is success. So you can see that in terms of the component tree, you saw the app component, the router outlet is being displayed here. And now, since it's displaying the hello work component, you can actually take a quick look at that. And you can also look at the source for this component. And this component really is more of an HTML value, and I can show you one of them. They all look pretty much the same. So let's say just take a look at the hello world component. If you look at the TypeScript, there is really nothing in there. If you look at the HTML, it's basically showing a bootstrap component called alert, and it says heads up working. So just to recap, basically I'm using now routing. So you can see the routes are being changed, and basically whatever the route is, that component shows up here. And the reason the component shows up here is because as you can see, I am in the TypeScript basically getting my router and navigating it to the slash, and then you put in this variable which has the value, uh, the random value that comes back from my service. So you can navigate through this, and you can also do it in HTML. If you wanted to do it statically, you would have something called the router link equal to slash, and you can look at the documentation. But this is more of a dynamic way of seeing the routing. Uh, Basically, most of the routing code is under this router module. I would recommend using that, and that's what is recommended in the Angular 2. Is if you use this, and you can specify your routes easily, and then you can have an application that is essentially controlled by various routes. So you can think of this as a way of you're going to different pages, and you're going to see different views and different components. Thank you for watching this short screencast, and I'm going to add this to my website, Gore Associate, under Angular 2 Routing Basics. And you have a great day.